They mocked her, rejected her, called her useless. But in the end, she was the one they bowed to. The courtyard trembles under the weight of silence. Warriors form a circle, their blades drawn but unmoving, their breaths shallow as if the air itself has turned against them. At the center stands a woman they once dismissed, alone, unarmed, yet untouched. A faint glow flickers behind her eyes, steady and unyielding. And before her, the Alpha kneels. Not out of weakness, not out of defeat. Something deeper holds him there, something no one dares to name. She is Selene, the Luna they never accepted. The one whispered about in corners, dismissed in meetings, overlooked in every moment that mattered. And him, Rowan, the Alpha who ruled without question, whose authority had never once been challenged, until now. At the edge of the circle stands Darius, the Beta who watches everything and speaks little, his gaze fixed on Selene as if he has been waiting for this moment long before anyone else realized it was coming. The clearing was alive with anticipation, every torch casting trembling shadows across the assembled pack, their murmurs rolling like a distant storm. The night air smelled of smoke and wild herbs, mingling with the tension that seemed to settle on everyone's shoulders. Selene stepped forward, her bare feet brushing the damp earth, and she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. Each gaze carried expectation, judgment, curiosity, and the faintest trace of doubt. They had called her gentle, fragile, weak, and yet here she stood, determined to face them all. Rowan, the Alpha, towered at the center of the gathering, his presence magnetic and unyielding, the kind of authority that silenced even the most restless hearts. His eyes, cold and sharp as fractured ice, were fixed on her with a mixture of something unspoken, something she could not yet name. The pack held their collective breath, waiting for the bond to be acknowledged, for the ceremony to proceed, for Selene to finally claim her place beside him. But instead, the world seemed to tilt and crack beneath her. He did not reach for her hand. He did not speak the words that would seal their bond. Instead, Rowan's voice cut across the murmurs, calm but merciless, each syllable striking like steel. "Selene," he said, and the clearing went silent. "You are not what I need. You do not belong here." The sound of those words echoed inside her chest like thunder rolling through a cavern. Pain erupted, sharp and twisting, not only in her body, but in the core of who she thought she was. The invisible thread that tied her to him, the bond that had filled her nights with hope and dreams of belonging, shattered with a force that left her knees weak and her heart burning. Laughter followed, first tentative, then swelling, cruel, and collective, rippling through the crowd like poison. Whispers darted from one wolf to another, sharp and mocking. She was always soft, never strong enough. Not enough. Selene's face burned, hot with humiliation, yet she did not cry. She did not plead. Every inch of her screamed with the injustice of it, every pulse of her heartbeat insisting she would endure it. And then she saw her rival, Leora, standing to the side with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Pride twisted in that gaze, venom laced with satisfaction. The one who had envied Selene, who had whispered behind her back, now stepped forward, gliding with the ease of someone who believed themselves victorious. She had taken everything Selene had worked for: the respect of the pack, the attention of the Alpha, the fragile hope of recognition, and she wore it like a crown, as if Selene's pain was her reward. Rowan's expression softened for the briefest moment, just enough to suggest that he felt some internal conflict, some invisible struggle, yet he did not relent. His pride and authority outweighed whatever shadow of remorse might have flickered behind his eyes. The crowd sensed it, and the laughter grew louder. Some wolves whispered questions that no one dared answer aloud. Some shook their heads, pitying her, or relishing her fall. Selene felt the status she had earned, however modest, stripped away layer by layer. The ceremonial garb she had been prepared to wear for recognition now felt like a costume of shame. Every emblem, every token, every gesture that had symbolized her belonging was meaningless in that instant. She was exposed, vulnerable, humiliated before the very pack she had once thought would protect her. Yet even in that moment, as tears threatened to rise and her chest ached with the sting of rejection, there was a spark. Something unbroken deep inside her whispered that this was not the end. That perhaps enduring this, surviving the shame, the mockery, the stripping away of everything she held dear, was a crucible meant to forge something greater. Her gaze swept the assembly, locking briefly on each wolf who had judged her, laughed at her, whispered against her. Each one would remember this moment not as a triumph, but as a warning. And then her eyes found Darius, standing silent at the edge, watching, waiting. In that single glance, she felt the faintest thread of understanding. Someone had seen her, someone had not laughed, someone knew that she was not what the pack assumed. "Tell me, how would you survive that kind of humiliation?" Her lips did not move, yet the question hung in the night air, sharp as the edge of a blade. The pack did not answer. No one dared. And in that silence, as the torches flickered and the wind whispered through the trees, Selene understood that survival would not come from pleading, from begging, or from seeking approval. It would come from rising, no matter how deep the pain, no matter how sharp the betrayal, no matter how loudly the world mocked her. She would rise. And when she did, they would bow. The forest felt endless, stretching in every direction as if the trees themselves conspired to keep her trapped. Selene stumbled over roots, her bare feet scraping against stones, every step heavy with exhaustion. The torches, the pack, the laughter, they were gone now, swallowed by distance and time, leaving only the whisper of wind through the branches and the dull ache of her chest that no one could reach. Each inhale carried the bitterness of abandonment, each exhale a reminder that the world had turned against her. The weight of rejection pressed down on her so fully that her legs wobbled beneath her, threatening to betray her, threatening to let her collapse into the dirt that seemed suddenly too cold, too harsh for her fragile body. She sank to a moss-covered stone, knees drawn close, and allowed herself a single trembling breath. Images flashed behind her eyelids, the memory of Rowan's gaze the night before, the way it had once made her heart race with warmth, with hope. She remembered the gentle way he had touched her hand in council meetings, the rare softness that peeked through his prideful exterior when he thought no one was watching. She had loved him with everything she had, with the kind of devotion that burned quietly yet fiercely. Every small smile, every fleeting glance had been a thread tying her to a dream she had believed was real. But now those threads lay shredded at her feet, and the pain of it pressed into her like a living thing. Her body, already frail from the tension and strain of the ceremony, betrayed her further. Her vision blurred, head spinning as dizziness clawed at the edges of her consciousness. She stumbled forward, grasping at tree trunks to keep herself upright, but her strength wavered. A faint moan escaped her lips as she sank further, the physical weakness amplifying the raw ache in her heart. Every heartbeat felt labored, as though her chest had been hollowed out and left to ache against the night air. And then, as her eyes closed in momentary escape, a whisper brushed against the edges of her mind. Faint, almost imperceptible, like the rustling of leaves or the sigh of wind through the pines. She shivered despite herself, her pulse quickening with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The sound was distant, yet strangely intimate, threading through her thoughts in a way that made her feel as though something, was watching, waiting, calling. The moonlight, pale and cold above, seemed to respond to her presence. It spilled through the trees in unusual patterns, bending around her form, highlighting her delicate figure, her trembling hands. Shadows stretched unnaturally, as if the forest itself recognized her despair and mirrored it, twisting it, amplifying it, holding her in a circle of silver and darkness. She raised her head, her eyes reflecting the pale luminescence, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the faintest pulse of power within her chest. It was weak, unsure, but unmistakable. Memories clawed back into her mind, small moments of warmth, of connection with Rowan, of whispered promises that had never been fulfilled. She saw him standing in the clearing, prideful and untouchable, and she remembered the ache in her own chest, the longing that had driven her to love him despite every warning. Her hands pressed to her knees as tears blurred the edge of her vision, her body quivering with fatigue and sorrow, yet something beneath it all stirred. Something primal and untamed, hidden beneath layers of pain and rejection, flickering in rhythm with the moonlight that seemed to bend in response. Whispers returned, more insistent now, threading through the dreamlike haze of her mind. Names she did not recognize, voices she could not place, secrets hinted at but never fully revealed. She did not understand them, could not grasp their meaning, yet they made her pulse race and a strange fire prickled beneath her skin. Even in weakness, Even in isolation, she felt the stirrings of something larger than herself, something that had been waiting all along, hidden beneath the fragile shell of the Luna she had once believed herself to be. The night pressed on, cold and indifferent, but Selene remained seated on that mossy stone, shivering, aching, faint, yet aware. A quiet sense of awakening hummed at the edge of her consciousness, whispering that the solitude, the betrayal, the pain, all of it, was only the beginning of what was to come. The days that followed were unrelenting in their silence, each one stretching longer than the last, yet Selene could not escape the feeling that the world around her was quietly bending to her presence. The small scratches along her arms and legs, inflicted by brambles as she fled the clearing, vanished almost before the sting could register. Tiny cuts that would have left her wincing for hours healed in minutes, the skin knitting itself with a speed that made her pause and stare in disbelief. She touched her arms repeatedly, as though confirming she was not imagining it, as though the forest had conspired to grant her body an impossible resilience. The moonlight continued its strange attentions. In moments of intense stress, her eyes flickered silver, catching the light and reflecting it back in a way that made her feel unmoored, as though she were no longer entirely human, or entirely the Luna she had once been thought to be. The glow would vanish as quickly as it appeared, leaving her unsure if anyone had seen, leaving her to wonder if it was some private awakening or an omen she had yet to understand. From the shadows of the pack, the elders watched. Their silence was measured, cautious, as if they knew more than they let on but feared the consequences of speaking aloud. They had witnessed many things over decades of rule, yet there was a tremor of recognition in their glances when they observed Selene. A furrowed brow, a pause mid-step, a subtle tightening of the jaw, it was all fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet enough to tell the story of their unease. The weight of their knowledge pressed silently on the pack, without a single word being spoken. Rowan, meanwhile, could not ignore the inconsistencies that had begun to prick at the edges of his awareness. The alpha, whose instincts were as sharp as steel, noticed the way the air seemed to still around her, how shadows stretched toward her presence, how animals that passed near her halted, as though sensing an invisible current of power. Even his pride, his discipline, and his carefully honed control could not dismiss the way her wounds mended, the subtle glint of silver that shimmered when her emotions surged. He questioned what he had believed he knew about her, about weakness and strength, about loyalty and submission. His mind, so accustomed to certainty, began to churn with doubt. Every glance he stole toward her, whether in council or at the edges of their territory, carried a weight he could neither explain nor ignore. The pack's whispers had long ceased to matter to him, but now the quiet between them felt charged, filled with tension that even he could not name. Selene herself felt it, the subtle awareness of something stirring beneath the surface. She could not yet understand it, could not control it, yet it pulsed beneath her skin and echoed in her heartbeat. The power that had lain dormant, suppressed by ridicule and rejection, began to rise slowly, carefully, like embers awakening beneath a winter frost. Each day, each silent moment in the woods, each fleeting glance from the elders or from Rowan, seemed to fan it, coaxing it forward in ways that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. And in one quiet instant, when the moon hung high and silver in the sky, Rowan observed her again, from across the clearing, unseeing yet seeing everything. Something in her stance, in the tilt of her head, in the glimmer of light in her eyes, pierced the shield he had built around his mind. There was a pause, an almost imperceptible stillness in the world. Even the wind held its breath. There was something about her, something no one understood. And in that sentence, unspoken yet alive in the tension between them, the first seeds of awareness were planted, a dangerous, thrilling curiosity that would change everything. The forest no longer felt safe, though it had always been her refuge. Shadows seemed sharper here, branches more threatening, each rustle carrying the potential for danger. Leora had not forgotten, and neither had the pack that had once dismissed Selene. Whispers became glances, and glances became schemes. The rival had learned her weakness, or at least, the pack believed they had and sought to exploit it. Began with subtle provocations. Leora would appear at the edge of her path, daring her with thinly veiled smirks, letting her claws catch branches in mock threat, taunting her with words meant to break her resolve. Each time, Selene felt her pulse spike, her body trembling not with fear but with tension she could barely control. The forest air itself seemed to hum in response, the leaves whispering like warnings, as if the woods recognized both predator and prey and knew which side of the balance she occupied. Then came the real test, an ambush in a narrow clearing orchestrated with precision. Wolves moved from the shadows with silent, lethal intent. Seleni's heart hammered in her chest, every instinct screaming flight, yet the attack came too fast, too precise. A blade glinted in torchlight, a fang snapped near her shoulder, and for a moment everything blurred. Pain lanced through her, sharp enough to make her vision swim, yet even as she faltered, the injuries she should have succumbed to began to fade almost instantly. The cuts sealed, the bruises vanished, and she staggered upright, blinking in disbelief. A force she could not name, could not yet understand, had shielded her from death. Meanwhile, Rowan, observing from a distance, felt a cold unease settle over him. Doubt, a sensation so unfamiliar and unwelcome, gnawed at his mind. He had cast her aside, severed the bond with certainty, yet here she was, surviving, defying the laws that governed them. Every instinct he had relied upon screamed that his decision had been flawed, that his judgment had been clouded by pride and misunderstanding. The alpha who had never been wrong now felt the edge of uncertainty, and it unsettled him more than any physical threat ever could. The pack stirred, sensing the tension before understanding its source. Elders who had once remained silent began to watch more closely, their eyes narrowing as they debated whether intervention was necessary or if Seleni's survival was a sign of something extraordinary, something the pack could neither control nor explain. Politics shifted like tides. Alliances whispered in shadows, and arguments flared over territory and loyalty, the air thick with suspicion and the unspoken question of how one Luna could survive the dangers that had felled others without even flinching. And then someone, an elder with the curiosity that bordered on recklessness, began to investigate Seleni's origins. Records long buried were sifted through, tales half-forgotten were retold in hushed tones, and threads of the past emerged, hinting at mysteries her own mind had never been privy to. Questions formed in their murmurs. Where had she come from? Why had she been so fragile and unnoticed? How could a being so underestimated endure attacks that should have ended her life? Selene herself felt the tightening coil of these events but did not falter. She had no time for despair. Each challenge, each attempt at harm, each probing question only sharpened her senses, strengthening a resolve that was no longer fragile, no longer submissive. Yet, despite every ounce of courage, there were moments when the exhaustion pressed down so fully that she stumbled, gasping, and the world threatened to slip from her grasp. In one such instant, a shadow brushed across her, unseen yet tangible. A presence that moved faster than thought and steadied her when she should have fallen, guided her when the path was lost, and shielded her from harm she could not have survived alone. Rowan, watching from the ridge above, saw it, vague, impossible, and utterly undeniable. His heart clenched as realization gnawed at him. He had underestimated her. He had misjudged the strength hidden beneath the softness he had once scorned. Every doubt, every regret, every pang of curiosity surged through him as he observed her rise from yet another trial unscathed. The pack continued to murmur, to scheme, to whisper behind closed eyes, yet they could not escape what was happening before them. Selene moved through the trials as though guided by something far older, far deeper than the petty squabbles of mortals. The air pulsed with tension, thick with fear, wonder, and unspoken awe. And as she paused, just for a heartbeat, to lift her head toward the silver moon, the forest seemed to hold its breath with her. The wind stilled, the shadows stilled, and even the stars seemed to watch in silent anticipation. No one understood it, no one could name it, but all of them felt it. A power, alive and untamed, had begun to awaken. And the world would never be the same. The clearing shimmered with the late afternoon light, golden streaks weaving through the trees, as though the forest itself had paused to watch. Selene stood alone in the center, the faint flicker of silver in her eyes betraying nothing yet revealing everything. The pack had gathered once more, drawn by whispers of her survival, drawn by curiosity, and perhaps drawn by the uncomfortable truth that what they had dismissed as weakness might have been something far beyond their understanding. Leora stepped forward again, her movements deliberate, calculated, every ounce of her body radiating dominance and challenge. She carried a weapon meant to intimidate, a blade glinting in the sunlight, but also intended to assert control, to remind the pack who held the power in this territory. The pack tensed, murmurs rippling through them, every wolf anticipating a repeat of the humiliation Selene had endured before. And yet, Selene did not flinch. Her gaze met Leora's with unwavering calm, and in that moment, the air around her seemed to thicken, a subtle vibration threading through the ground as though the earth itself acknowledged her presence. Leora lunged, a flicker of steel aimed for her shoulder, and Selene moved, not with hesitation, not with fear, but with a precision that startled even the most observant. She blocked the strike, a soft yet unyielding force meeting Leora's momentum, pushing back without visible strain, her body bending and twisting with a grace that seemed impossible given how the pack had labeled her. A hush fell over the clearing. Even the elders who had watched from the shadows exchanged silent glances, the unspoken message clear. Something had shifted. Leora faltered, anger and disbelief warring across her expression as Selene held her ground, the faint silver glint in her eyes flaring briefly with controlled intensity. The pack watched, captivated, unsure whether to cheer, to intervene, or to recoil from the unexpected display. And then Selene spoke, her voice soft yet carrying across the expanse, steady and unbroken. "You do not frighten me," she said, each word deliberate, each syllable infused with a strength that no one had anticipated. "Your threats mean nothing, your power over me is gone. This ends now." The moment stretched, taut with suspense. Leora stepped back, her smirk replaced by a flash of unease. The pack shifted, whispers forming again, but this time tinged with doubt rather than mockery. The notion of Selene's weakness, once unanimous, once undeniable, crumbled in that instant. Every observer sensed it. The Luna they had mocked, the fragile figure they had dismissed, had become something else entirely. From the shadows, one elder, draped in the weight of years and experience, finally spoke. Not loudly, not to command, but low and deliberate, a voice threading through the murmurs of the pack. "She is not what you think." The words lingered in the air, heavy with implication, and yet incomplete, a fragment of truth that ignited speculation and unease in equal measure. The pack, so accustomed to certainty, felt a ripple of fear and curiosity coil within them. They had witnessed her endurance, her precision, her defiance, and now this hint of something greater, something concealed. Rowan, watching from the perimeter, clenched his fists as conflicting emotions warred within him: regret, confusion, and an unfamiliar pull of fascination. He had rejected her, dismissed her, and yet every instinct in his body now screamed that he had misjudged her entirely. The doubts that had begun earlier now roared with new intensity. Selene's eyes glimmered under the golden light, a subtle shimmer that no explanation could satisfy. She did not speak further, did not boast or threaten. She simply stood, steady and unwavering, letting the aftermath of her actions ripple through the pack. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath, the rustle of leaves quieting as if acknowledging that the balance had shifted, that a new force had entered their midst, one that demanded recognition without revealing its full measure. The pack murmured, whispered, and glanced at one another, yet no one dared approach her. Leora withdrew slowly, her confidence shaken, while the elders exchanged silent, knowing looks, understanding more than the others could ever grasp. "She is not what you think." The words repeated in Selene's mind, echoing louder than any taunt or insult, a promise of power hidden, of strength restrained, of mysteries waiting to unfold. And in that suspended moment, the tension coiled tighter, pulling every heart in the clearing toward the undeniable truth. The Luna they had scorned was no longer the one they had underestimated. The night descended like a shroud, cold and suffocating, leaving the forest cloaked in shadows that twisted unnaturally under the pale moonlight. Selene moved cautiously, every step alert, muscles taut with exhaustion, and yet her mind raced faster than her body could keep pace. Leora had not forgotten the humiliation she had suffered at Selene's hands, nor the public defiance that had shattered her carefully constructed image of superiority. If Selene survived the forest, if she persisted in the face of ridicule and attempted attacks, then perhaps she could be removed by other means, subtle, insidious, and deadly. The trap was set with precision only a mind honed by envy could orchestrate. A glimmer of poison left where she would drink, a sharpened branch bent to spring at her unsuspecting form, whispers meant to lure her into a vulnerable path. The forest seemed heavier that night, as if the trees themselves bore witness to treachery in motion. Selene sensed it before she could see it, the quiet vibrations along the ground, the faint shift in the air, the way shadows stretched differently when malice was near. Her body ached, every muscle sore, every heartbeat a reminder of the relentless strain she had endured. Still, she moved forward, driven by a stubborn will that no amount of pain or betrayal could extinguish. And then it happened. The first trap triggered with a cruel snap, a sudden jolt that would have felled anyone weaker than her. The branch swung, cutting the space where she had been moments before, missing only because her reflexes, sharpened by desperation, carried her clear. A drop of poison glimmered faintly in her cup of water, unnoticed by all but her instincts, which recoiled in alarm before she could touch it. Leora's shadow lingered in the periphery, smirk frozen in anticipation of triumph, certain that Selene would falter, certain that the fragile Luna would finally be undone. But Selene did not falter, not entirely. She survived, yet the effort demanded everything from her. Her limbs trembled, weakness pooling at the edges of her consciousness, threatening to topple her with each step. Her breaths came in shallow, uneven gasps, and her vision blurred as though the world itself had grown heavy, pressing down against her fragile frame. Every ounce of her resolve strained under the weight of fear, betrayal, and exhaustion, and for the first time, tears threatened to spill, unbidden and unstoppable. Rowan, observing from a distance, could not remain passive any longer. He had cast her aside once, confident in his judgment, yet seeing her endure this latest assault, this deliberate cruelty orchestrated by a rival meant to destroy her, forced his instincts into conflict with his pride. The Alpha's mind raced, torn between intervention and observation, between protecting her and maintaining the semblance of authority that had always defined him. Every instinct that had once assured him of his rightness now screamed in confusion, warning that his earlier choice had been catastrophic. The pack, sensing the escalating tension, grew restless. Some moved toward the chaos with cautious curiosity, others held back, uncertain which side to choose. Alliances shifted like sand in the wind, and whispers of doubt circled through the trees, carrying questions too dangerous to voice aloud. Could the Luna survive this? Should Rowan intervene? Would loyalty to tradition outweigh the undeniable strength she had revealed? Selene's breaking point came swiftly, without warning, in a torrent of emotional and physical exhaustion that she could no longer suppress. Her knees buckled as the third strike nearly found its mark, and the ache in her chest was compounded by the humiliation of constant scheming against her. Every insult, every attempt at harm, every betrayal she had endured pooled into a single, overwhelming force that threatened to shatter her entirely. The forest itself seemed to recoil in response, leaves trembling as if sympathetic to her suffering, the wind whispering in mournful tones across the branches. And yet, even in that moment of near collapse, there was a flicker of something unstoppable. A faint pulse beneath her ribs, a subtle hum along her skin, a force she could not yet name, rose in response to the injustice and pain. The energy was fragile, uncertain, but it protected her in ways she could not yet comprehend. She felt it push her upright, steady her when weakness should have claimed her, and guide her away from the poison and the trap that would have ended her life. Leora recoiled, astonishment and fear flashing across her features as Selene's trembling hands clenched, her legs quivering, yet her stance unwavering. The Luna who had been dismissed, who had been mocked, who had been rejected, now radiated a quiet power that defied explanation. The pack shifted uneasily, whispers of doubt now edged with awe, the certainty of her weakness dissolving in the wake of what they had witnessed. Rowan's chest tightened, the tension pulling at his pride and instincts alike. He could not deny it. Every decision he had made, every choice to cast her aside, now weighed against the evidence of her survival and resilience. The Alpha faced a choice he had thought long settled: remain detached, maintain control, or finally acknowledge that the Luna he had once rejected was far beyond what anyone, including himself, had ever understood. And in the quiet that followed the confrontation, Selene sank to one knee, breathing ragged, heart-hammering, yet alive. Alive because she had endured what should have destroyed her. Every betrayal, every attempt to harm her, had only unveiled the first hints of a strength no one could claim to understand. The forest was silent, yet the air thrummed with anticipation, carrying the unspoken truth that Selene had reached the edge of what she could endure, and the world would never be the same again. The night pressed down with an unbearable weight, dark and infinite, broken only by the silver sliver of the moon spilling its light across the clearing. Selene sank to the damp earth, the soil cold and unyielding beneath her trembling body, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she let herself collapse completely. Her hands dug into the dirt as tears streamed unbidden, carving paths down her cheeks, mixing with the grit of the forest floor. Every betrayal, every insult, every act of cruelty she had endured, every moment she had been dismissed, underestimated, abandoned, crashed over her in a torrent so fierce it left her hollow and raw. Her chest heaved, lungs burning, legs too weak to carry the weight of her body any longer. The forest seemed impossibly vast, stretching endlessly in every direction, indifferent to her suffering. The stars twinkled coldly overhead, distant and uncaring, yet the moon, pale, luminous, impossibly close, cast a light that caressed her form with a strange intimacy, illuminating her trembling silhouette as though it knew the agony and the potential within her. And then she heard it, a whisper carried on the wind, soft and melodic, yet commanding enough to make the hair along her arms rise. It was not the wind, not the rustling leaves, not the echoes of her own racing thoughts. It was a voice older than time, rich with authority and tenderness, threading through the night and threading into her very soul. Selene, chosen one, do not despair. Her head jerked up, eyes wide, pupils dilated, but the voice continued, wrapping around her, filling her chest, flowing into every empty space that grief and pain had carved. It did not shout or demand. It beckoned, coaxed, and held her trembling spirit with the quiet certainty of something ancient and eternal. "You have been watched," the voice breathed, luminous in her mind. "You have been tempered by fire, tested by cruelty, shaped by despair. The strength you thought broken is only beginning to awaken." Selene's knees buckled again, yet she did not collapse entirely. She lifted her arms, unconsciously, as if reaching for the invisible hand that guided her, for the presence that promised she was not alone. The wind twisted around her in response, leaves spiraling in a hypnotic dance, the shadows of the trees bending subtly toward her form. The silver glimmer in her eyes flickered, stronger now, and her pulse thrummed in rhythm with the unseen force whispering in her mind. "You are chosen, tied to the ancient power that has watched over this world since the first moon rose. Do not fear it. Let it rise within you." The words echoed like a drumbeat through the hollow of her chest, vibrating into every fiber of her being. Selene's hands pressed to the ground as if drawing strength from the earth itself, and the pain, the exhaustion, the grief, the relentless sense of abandonment morphed into something unrecognizable. It was no longer weakness. It was not despair. It was a conduit, a channel for the power that had slumbered quietly beneath the fragile shell the pack had once mocked. Tears streaked her face, but now they carried a strange brilliance, reflecting the moonlight in shimmering arcs. Her breath came in ragged gasps, uneven, yet steadying with each whispered word of guidance from the unseen presence. Something ancient stirred in her veins, a rhythm older than the pack, older than the forest, older than the alpha who had doubted her. And in that suspended, sacred moment, Selene understood, without fully comprehending, that she was not merely surviving. She was awakening. Every trial, every betrayal, every humiliation had been a preparation for this, a shaping of her spirit to receive what had always been hers by fate, by choice, by ancient design. The moonlight intensified, silver threads weaving around her, illuminating the tremor of power beginning to flow freely. Her voice, quiet at first, emerged, trembling and raw, calling to the force that had chosen her, acknowledging it, inviting it into her weary, battered body. "I am here, I am ready." The forest held its breath. The shadows clung, the wind paused, and the ancient presence brushed against her mind like a caress and a command, so gentle yet so powerful that it made her knees press harder into the soil in reverence. She was no longer just Selene, the Luna dismissed by the pack. She was something more, chosen, awakened, a force tied to mysteries that stretched beyond mortal understanding, her power stirring like the tide, just beneath the surface, ready to rise. And for the first time, she felt it fully, the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders, heavy but undeniable, terrifying yet exhilarating. The moon itself seemed to pulse in agreement, spilling silver light that caressed her like a promise and a challenge all at once. Her breaking point had been reached. Her despair had been absolute. And in that crucible of suffering, under the watchful gaze of the moon, something ancient had chosen her. Something ancient had begun to rise. The clearing waited, suffused with tension so thick it pressed against every chest like a tangible weight. The pack had gathered again, drawn by curiosity, fear, and the whispers that had spread like wildfire. Every eye tracked her as she stepped forward, shoulders trembling only slightly, every movement calculated yet seemingly effortless. Leora's smirk, sharp and cruel, faltered, her eyes narrowing as she realized the Luna before them no longer carried the fragility they had all counted on. The air pulsed around Selene, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. The forest seemed to lean closer, the branches swaying in a rhythm that echoed the tremor in her chest. Every leaf, every stone, even the shadows themselves responded to the faint hum of power rising from her being. She drew a slow breath, filling her lungs with the night air. Tasting the tension, the fear, the disbelief that hung around her like a living thing. Leora lunged first, confidence sharpened into aggression, expecting the same hesitation, the same faltering steps that had once marked Selene's weakness. But Selene did not falter. Her eyes flared silver, brighter than ever, reflecting the pale moonlight and sending a ripple of unease through the gathered pack. The moment she moved, the shift was undeniable. A subtle vibration rolled across the clearing, almost imperceptible at first, then intensifying, stirring the ground beneath their feet, the very air vibrating with a latent force that demanded recognition. With deliberate calm, Selene took one measured step forward. The forest seemed to exhale with her, the wind curling around her like liquid silver, sweeping leaves into spirals of ethereal motion. The shadows stretched, bent, and twisted toward her, and a hush fell over the pack. Silence pressed in so heavily that even the distant chirping of crickets seemed muffled, as if nature itself had stopped to witness what was unfolding. And then the air shifted, abruptly and unmistakably. A ripple of pressure moved outward from her, gentle at first, then overwhelming, like the tide rushing against cliffs long untouched. The smell of ozone mixed with the faint scent of silver light, almost tangible in its intensity. Wolves stumbled, the wind whipping their fur, teeth bared instinctively, but none dared approach. Leora froze mid-step, the blade in her hand trembling as though recognizing the futility of her aggression. Her eyes widened, disbelief replacing arrogance, as she felt the invisible weight pressing down, not physically, but with a force that unsettled every nerve, every instinct, every assumption she had ever held. Rowan, standing at the edge of the clearing, felt it first as a tightening in his chest, a low hum vibrating through his bones, an undeniable pull that rooted him to the spot. Pride, control, certainty, everything that had defined him faltered as the energy radiated outward. Every breath he took seemed heavier, every heartbeat louder, resonating with the power Selene had been denied recognition for until now. Then, impossibly, the moment crystallized. With a single step forward, Selene's presence surged, radiating dominance so absolute it defied understanding. The air itself twisted, thickened, shimmered with a silver haze that curled around her like living mist. The faint glow from her eyes expanded, touching the tips of the branches, flickering across faces, bending shadows, drawing the entire clearing into a sphere of her command. And the Alpha, the one who had rejected her, who had cast her aside and questioned her worth, dropped to his knees. Not out of submission, not out of weakness, but in stunned recognition, in awe and fear of the force he had dismissed, the strength he had underestimated. His jaw slackened, pride shattered, chest heaving, as the ground seemed to acknowledge her, as though the very earth bowed to the weight of what she had become. A beat passed, then another. Silence swallowed the clearing, oppressive and suffocating. Wolves pressed back instinctively, ears flattened, tails tucked or bristling, hearts hammering against ribs as the enormity of the moment sank in. Leora dropped her weapon, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing without sound. The elders, silent witnesses for decades, exchanged glances that conveyed a mixture of awe and trepidation. They had seen fragments before, hints of what she could do, but nothing on this scale. Selene did not raise her voice. She did not shout or command. She simply stood, steady, controlled, every motion a demonstration of effortless power. The air trembled at her presence, vibrating with a rhythm that was hers alone, her gaze cutting through the assembly like a blade, measuring, claiming, asserting. The wind carried her silent declaration, brushing past every member of the pack, whispering that the Luna they had dismissed was no longer the same. Every heartbeat, every rustle of fur, every gasp unspoken in their throats acknowledged the undeniable truth. Selene had risen beyond their judgment, beyond their understanding, and nothing, not mockery, not malice, not pride, would ever contain her again. With a single step, the air shifted, and the Alpha, the one who rejected her, dropped to his knees. The forest seemed to vibrate in resonance with her power. Leaves danced violently, branches snapped in protest or awe, and shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching long and low as if bowing to the force now commanding the clearing. Silence stretched, unbearable in its magnitude, broken only by the collective intake of breath from the pack, the shocked stares of every witness, the trembling realization that everything they had believed about Selene had been irrevocably shattered. Fear, awe, and disbelief coiled through the clearing, binding everyone in place. Selene's silver eyes burned steadily, a beacon of power, dominance, and control. The transformation was complete, not in form alone, but in presence, in essence, in the undeniable truth that the Luna they had mocked had become something far greater than they could ever imagine. And for one long, suspended moment, nothing moved. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next motion, the next word, the next command, knowing full well that nothing would ever be the same again. The clearing lay still, heavy with disbelief, the silence broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and the uneven breathing of those who remained upright. Wolves that had mocked, laughed, and scorned her now trembled, some kneeling instinctively, their eyes wide with awe and fear. The rival, once so confident and cruel, stumbled backward, face pale and hands shaking, exposed in her audacity and impotence. Every plan, every whispered betrayal meant to harm Selene had collapsed in the wake of her undeniable power. Rowan's gaze remained fixed on her, chest tightening with regret that gnawed at his pride. The weight of every dismissal, every rejection, every moment he had turned away from her pressed on him like an iron chain. He had thought he understood strength, thought he could measure her worth, and now, kneeling at her periphery, he faced the truth that he had been blind. Selene did not speak, did not smile, did not seek consolation. She lifted her chin, shoulders squared, and let the quiet radiance of her presence speak for her. She no longer needed their approval, no longer required their acknowledgement. Every flicker of silver in her eyes, every pulse of energy around her, declared a command older than pride or envy. She had endured humiliation, betrayal, and disbelief, and emerged above it all. The pack, humbled and shaken, knelt in unison, a sea of bowed heads and lowered eyes. Leora's defiance had vanished, replaced with the stark recognition of her failure, the futility of resistance against someone who had transcended mortal limitations. Rowan, still on his knees, swallowed his shame, the weight of regret anchoring him, while Selene's gaze swept across them, not with cruelty, but with quiet, unshakable authority. The moonlight, silver and radiant, washed over her, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the edges of the forest like a halo. She was no longer the Luna they had mocked, no longer fragile or weak, no longer bound by the expectations of a pack that had once dictated her worth. She stood above them all, an immovable force, her power unchallenged, her presence absolute. The forest exhaled with her, every leaf, every whispering wind, every shadow acknowledging the shift. Selene had claimed her place, not through submission, not through pleading, but through the awakening of something ancient, something unstoppable. In that suspended moment, it was clear. The Luna who had been scorned had become the force to which even the proudest bowed, and no one would ever doubt her again. The clearing seemed to pulse with the remnants of her awakening, silver light still lingering like smoke in the air. Yet a new tension prickled beneath the calm she had claimed. Even as the pack knelt in stunned obedience, a shadow stirred beyond the tree line, unseen yet felt. A presence far older, far darker, drawn to the tremor of power that Selene had unleashed. The wind whispered again, carrying a voice more urgent this time, its tone both warning and guiding. Selene, your rise has not gone unnoticed. What approaches is older, stronger, and merciless. Prepare yourself, for the trials to come will test even what you believe is your limit. Her eyes flickered, silver light deepening as the words etched themselves into her mind. The forest seemed to respond, branches bending slightly as though acknowledging the gravity of what lay ahead. She had survived humiliation, betrayal, and even the disbelief of those she once trusted. But this was something entirely new, a challenge that promised to push her further than she had ever imagined. Selene's gaze lifted to the sky, moonlight bathing her in a radiant, almost ethereal glow. For the first time, she did not seek approval, understanding, or mercy from anyone below her. She was ready, aware, and undeniably alive in the way that only the chosen could be. And as the wind stirred, carrying distant echoes of something ancient and unseen, a chill ran through the pack, through Rowan, through the forest itself. The stillness around her was deceptive, fragile, pregnant with anticipation, as though the world itself was holding its breath. But what they didn't know was that her true power had only just begun.